listening to the Mark Bradford Alchemy for Life podcast.
Happy Father's Day, everyone. So I am here with Mark Williams. I want to say happy Father's Day to Mark and happy Father's Day to all the people listening out there. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Mark. How you doing? You okay? Happy Father's Day to you, too.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And as I always start all of my podcasts, I'm going to ask you who you are and what you do. Can you go ahead and let us know that? Who are you?
Yeah, my name is Mark Williams, and I live in the Bridgend Valleys in South Wales, Cardiff way. And obviously married, got a young boy. He's 15 now. And my occupation now is I'm a trainer, speaker, and campaigner for for fathers' mental health, really, paternal mental health, new dads.
That's awesome. And what you do is the campaigning and the speaking that you do as well are all focused on the mental health of dads, which is not something that we hear much about, is it?
No, it's especially since I first started 10 years ago, nothing much was said about new dads actually suffering from anxiety or depression after either having the baby or even before during pregnancy, the antenatal period. So yeah, it's a big area that's drawing more attention now because, as we know, especially in the UK, the biggest killer under 50 in men is suicide, unfortunately. So there's another reason why we are campaigning.
Wow, that's some powerful stuff. I doubt a lot of people know that. I did have another gentleman on the show a while back, and we did have a really frank and good discussion about suicide, but it's not something that's typically in the news. It's not something that people typically talk a lot about, and they certainly don't focus on the fatherhood aspect of things and how that can be affected. And so your focus has been on the mental health of dads and how parenting affects them. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Like mothers, fathers struggle to bond with their children as well. And as we know, with mums with postnatal depression, obviously it can have an impact if the mothers struggle with their mental health on that child's development as well. And a lot of people, your viewers might not know that witnessing a traumatic birth in a labour ward is PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder, which is an anxiety disorder, either witnessing or experiencing a life-threatening event. So, coming from a personal experience, witnessing my wife thinking she was going to die in her labour ward, obviously with my baby, my son, it was the most horrific time for me, and it was the first time I actually ever had a panic attack, actually in the labour ward.
Wow, that's not even anything I had considered. Both my kids were born via C-section, so it wasn't and the way things are set up is that area was mostly hidden, so I spent most of my time on the other side of the curtain, but I was right there, and I didn't really think of the effects of something like that, especially if your wife's life is in danger along with your child. And I know that's one of the amazing advances of technology, because it wasn't that long ago that so many people would have just simply died in childbirth. I mean, and my kids wouldn't be here today if this was, let's say, 100 years ago, because they didn't even have C-sections and things like that at that time.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. And it's I think even when it comes to parent and fatherhood, I think as we know, Mark, a lot of things have changed since then as well. Fatherhood, the pressures are totally different now as well. There's more hands-on fathers, dads at home, staying home, and mum is going to work. Especially in the UK, we've seen a lot of stay-at-home dads. And so yeah, fatherhood has totally changed over the years, and I think it's more precious now than ever. A father should be there for the children.
Well, yeah, and if I can be very, very candid about this, I mean, I think they've added a lot to fatherhood when it comes to expectations without giving any of the kudos that comes along with that. And so I think the expectations have been raised, but by the same token, there is no understanding that goes along with those expectations. So I think fathers are expected to be superhuman in that way, and yet not benefit from a lot of parenting. And I'll give you an example of that. And when my kids both had their first day of school, I was just I was just amazed. It was very emotional for me. I mean, my kids are getting on a bus with a stranger and going away for a while. It was crazy. And so my wife at the time, I'm divorced now. My wife at the time, she got together with her friends once that happened, because that's what moms do. All the moms get together and they commiserate and they cry and they talk about their kids and they have a big long all day long play date and stuff like that. And I think that's awesome. But I didn't have that avenue. I had to go back to work. I had to go back to my office, which was at home, and just sit there and stare at my monitor and think, oh my God, I just turned a page in my kids' lives. And, you know, my little boy and then my little girl, and I just stared at my monitor and I cried by myself in my office because, you know, there's no recourse. You can't get together with other dads because that was unheard of. And you certainly can't tag along with the moms because that at the time was considered kind of odd. So there's a lot of recourse missing, and I can certainly see how that affects mental health of the dudes when they just don't have that outcome, especially when they're told to suck it up and, oh my God, you're showing emotion as a parent, you know, what's wrong with you, right? So I certainly think that probably adds a bit to this.
Absolutely, no, it's well said. Exactly what you know perfectly what it's like, and as a stay-at-home dad, well, not working from home as well, those different pressures, the isolation in the first year of fatherhood for many fathers. I think it's 1 in 5 British fathers are totally isolated. November did a report, you know, and they use the word stress, 33%. So these figures are really high. And when you think that there was 2 other reports came out, the NCT in the UK, you know, 38% of fathers were concerned about their mental health, and 73% of those new fathers were actually concerned about their partner's mental health. And also the Mental Health Foundation, which is a big organisation in the UK, they found that 39% of young fathers actually wanted support for their mental health. And unfortunately, 34% of those fathers are not with their child full time. So there's loads of reasons why we should be looking at fathers' mental health. And that's one of the reasons why I set the International Fathers' Mental Health Day, because believe it or not, Mark, there's the World Health Organization doesn't screen fathers for their mental health, not recommend only mothers. But there's actually 600,000 male suicides every year around the UK, around the world, I should say. And we're not even screening dads like we are mums. So there's, some areas we really want to tackle into now.
Yeah, and you mentioned the International Father's Mental Health Day. And so did you establish that or help someone establish that?
Yeah, as you know, it's tomorrow. It's always a day after Father's Day. And it was started off in an idea in 2016. I was coming home from a conference speaking in London on a train. And I remember reading an article on Happy Donut Day or Happy Wine Day or something silly it was. And I thought, hang on, I said, it's Father's Day in a couple of weeks' time. And I thought, hang on, is there anything on father's mental health? Like it is the World Mental Health Day, or we got Suicide Prevention Day. So it was just from an idea then in 2016. And I got a couple of people together in the UK, and it just snowballed. And then the following year in 2017, I was lucky to meet Dr. Daniel Singley, obviously online. And I just wanted to be more international, to get other doctors, other people, campaigners around the world together. So me and Daniel actually co-founded together then in 2017. And now it's actually a recognised day in the UK, especially as alongside World Mental Health Day in the UK. So it's a bit of a, it's been this is our 5th year this year, and it's just growing every year, which is great.
Wow. Oh, I didn't realize this was going on for 5 years running so far.
Yeah, it's 5th year this year now it is. So it's we're getting out there. We got more articles and people blogging about it, and the idea behind the day is actually to let people know what support is out there for fathers for their mental health, and also then to actually tell organisations to share what they're doing as well on the day that can help fathers. So it's really getting in, adding research. What research is out there on fathers' mental health, and also what studies people might be interested in. So it's really for one day, even though we should be talking about it every day, it's just one day every year and we make sure everyone gets together.
Well, and I think, we need to have the equation balanced. You can't put all your eggs into one basket and then leave somebody else out. If somebody has two parents, whether they got divorced or not, they still have two parents for the most part, and if you put all your eggs in one parent's basket and pretty much ignore the other one, and you wonder why that one is having a lot of problems, I think that's kind of silly. I think it's pretty obvious. And so, and I think the word awareness is used way too much, but I do think this is great that awareness is raised, especially since this is so connected with Father's Day. It's kind of hard not to forget about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm sorry, I said that backwards. It's hard to forget about it, pardon me, when it's the day right after, it's tomorrow. It's the day right after Father's Day. So I think that's awesome. And I think it comes in so many flavors. And, I feel comfortable discussing because we're both talking about fatherhood things. So, the story that I have is that I ended up being the full-time single parent with my kids. So I was the mom and the dad for quite some time, which of course I could never be a mom, but I tried to fill that in as best I could. I don't know. You can ask my kids how well I did. I think you'll get differing answers depending on the day you ask them. But being a dad by yourself and trying to run your business and raising two kids by yourself, and then seeing the commercials, I have to tell you, the moms, the moms commercials are all, and rightly so, about how hard the moms work and how they're there and they're a superhero and this, that, and the other thing, and they need their spa day and all that other wonderful stuff. And then Father's Day rolls around, and according to these commercials, all dads want is to be left alone and drink beer and fall asleep on a lazy boy. And that's so sad, because that's not it at all. They also want that the most meaningful thing for a dad is just to spend time, or to get like even a handwritten card, even if your kid's an adult, it's hugely meaningful to get just some time and some interaction with your kids and just be reminded that you are a dad. That's just such a cool thing.
Absolutely, Mark. Exactly right. It's I'm more aware. Obviously my work is very important, but like you said, I got a balance. I make sure always everything I've done in my child's life growing up, my boy's life. He's coming up to 16 next. Even just now before we did this talk, and we went for a walk, mountains, that sort of thing. So it's very important. Even the basic stuff. I've always really enjoyed fatherhood, but certainly going back when I first, my son was delivered, obviously by emergency C-section. I didn't get an initial bond or attachment for my son, which I had these feelings that no father really talked about before, as in anyone I knew. I didn't really have a connection. I didn't feel this overwhelming feeling of love that I was expecting from society. And that doubted me. And then also when my wife, Michelle, went on to have severe postnatal depression, I had to give up work. I was looking after her. She was really unwell. And then there was no money coming in, mortgage to pay. And I was starting to feel depressed myself and as well. So, and I struggle on, trying to man up, as they say. But I think my bond attachment really grew because I didn't realize at the time I was doing a lot of skin to skin when my wife was unwell in bed, and she's a fantastic mother and still is. When she couldn't get out of bed because she was so unwell, I was on my own with my son. And then, skin to skin, that oxytocin release, which we know can benefit both the father and also the child's development as well. So that bond and attachment really grew quick. And, it really grew to a point where I just loved fatherhood and from then on.
Well, that's very interesting because you don't really hear that much about the whole skin to skin. It's an assumption with moms because, especially when they allow the moms to hold the child, and but they don't really talk about that on the other side of the equation. And you touched on, the mortgage and all the other stuff, and it's like the reality of life and what keeps things going is sort of de facto on your shoulders sometimes. And I remember raising the kids, and I had a really good day where where they were all super happy and taken care of and everything was perfect, and it was the summertime and so forth. And then I was really happy with like the laundry being done and everything else. And then I went, wait, I didn't earn any money today. And I thought, oh my God, I can't even be happy for 24 hours because I'm both sides of the equation right now. And I know that's not what you're describing. Well, you're sort of describing that you were in that position for a while, and it's sort of hard to juggle the hard facts of reality and money and keeping things going, and the equally, if not more important, skills and dealing with your kids. And that's why the two parent is such a great thing. It's such a great thing to have one try to take on a lot of the duties of one while the other one takes on the duties of the other, or at least flip back and forth between them and share it. It's such a wonderful thing that when you go through a period where you don't have that, it's blatantly obvious that it would have been much better. So it's hard to juggle that, and I can see how it has a toll. It certainly had a toll on me. I certainly felt that. In fact, the whole concept of alchemy for life and having balance came from a comment that a psychologist said to me, and it came from the fact that all the stuff that my kids were going through, I didn't know, am I doing the right? I didn't have any formal training in trying to juggle all the crazy stuff going on at the time and be a good parent and try to be two parents at the same time and earn a living. So I remember taking them to psychologists and just saying, look, I just want to make sure everything's okay. And we had a number of visits. And at the end, she said, they're doing exceptionally well. She said they're doing surprisingly well considering the circumstances. She said, in fact, I'm really impressed. And I said, okay, good. And I was like ready to leave. And she said, but Mark, what are you doing for you? And then that's when I just sort of stared at her, that, deer in the headlights style. And I thought, well, I'm not doing anything for me. And she looked at me and she said, you have to do something for you, or there won't be anything left to do something for them. And then that's when it really hit me. And I thought, okay, this whole balance thing is really important. Then I started thinking about what life was made of and blah, blah, blah. But it's so funny that our discussion right now has to do with the genesis of the whole alchemy for life concept, which came from telling myself, hey, it's not selfish to do something for you and make sure that there's something left of yourself.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, definitely. You're so right, Mark. Absolutely. And, it's sometimes I like bulb moments sometimes, like what you experienced just then, you said. And yeah, it's funny for me, same as me. I think I didn't have really much purpose apart from obviously caring for my wife and my son. But I think when I had a breakdown years later, I think that changed my total outlook of everything in life. When I was so down and I couldn't tell anyone, I just wanted to make sure that I can get the message out there that there's so many other fathers who are struggling in silence actually as well. So it's interesting what you just said as well. It was a light bulb moment when speaking to a gentleman in a gym, and went for a similar experience to me, and that's how I set up a group going back nearly 10 years ago now, and it's just escalated from there. Then obviously writing a book and speaking and all sorts since, which has been great. So it does. Sometimes it's those light bulb moments sometimes that makes you realize, yeah, I think sometimes we got to do something for ourselves.
And you mentioned purpose. I mean, it's just one word, but there's a lot there. So, and that happens with both parents. That happens in parenting, and that, your purpose gets tied up into things. And technically, they typically say that a man's sort of identity and self-worth typically comes from his work, his career, the amount of money that he can bring in, and so forth. That's just the way that society has worked for so long. And with women, for the most part, before anyone yells at me, a lot of that comes from their ability to raise a family and so forth. So there's that dichotomy of those two things. And so when a man loses his job, it seems to be far more impactful, because that's where his identity was. So when you have this identity of being a father and being somebody who, who's supporting things and so forth at the same time, and you're sort of switching up and down, which I was trying to do the best I could to keep my business running and make sure we had money, and at the same time, make sure that these kids were okay. Your purpose sort of overlaps and fluctuates. And and you decide, well, which am I here? Because it'd be a lot easier to do one of these a little bit less now and then, which is the whole point of two parents. But the purpose is a big deal. And I want to ask you, you said you couldn't tell anyone. Do you mind if I ask you to explain that? Why? What do you mean you couldn't tell anyone?
Yeah, so when I was suffering from, obviously what I know now is depression, I didn't know what depression looked like. If I'm honest with you, I was very angry certain times, snappy. I was, my concentration level, I couldn't focus. And I was using alcohol, unfortunately, at many times in my life to cope with that depression. Like a lot of fathers I speak to, they use a lot of negative coping skills, like avoiding situations. Could be loads of reasons. So depression, especially postnatal depression, which is, you can imagine, how can men get postnatal depression, which I can explain later on. A lot of fathers like myself, in that first year of fatherhood, I definitely struggled, using alcohol. So I think, especially back in 2005, and the mental health awareness, especially in the UK, wasn't nowhere near like it is now today, in the UK especially. And so it was all a case of just man up, get on with it, you know what I mean? And my personality totally changed in that first year of fatherhood. I remember punching a sofa, busting my hand. I was even starting fights with bouncers, not because of when I did manage to get out with my friends, not because of I had a chance of beating anyone up. It wasn't the case. When somebody was hitting me, it was a case. It's another form of self-harm. So it's all these things were happening in that first year of fatherhood. But really, deep down, when I was home with my son, it was the most joyful experience I ever had as well. So I was having all these emotions which I'd never experienced before, and I had suppressed them before becoming a parent. All these feelings of trauma in my childhood and things that happened to me that were all coming out in that transition of fatherhood as well. And I think, like the research says, up to 50% of fathers or partners actually get depression looking after their loved ones with postnatal depression as well. So, but I can explain later on about the stats about postnatal depression in fathers. How can men get postnatal depression? And I will explain that later on with you if you fancy Mark talking about it.
Sure. And why wouldn't you be able to express yourself when in your entire life you're told to man up and be quiet?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
I mean that's the giant shielding bubble that they put around men to not express themselves and not to be emotional and to be strong and so on and so forth. And I've read so many stories of that sort of thing, and how that wall goes up for men so they can't express themselves, and then they're left to be alone. They're left to either somehow deal with it themselves. And as you said, a lot of those are negative coping mechanisms versus the positive coping mechanism. The coping mechanism of maybe talking it out with their wife or their partner or what have you, and doing things and getting together with other men and so forth. But for the most part, the negative coping mechanisms are just so much more available for the average human. And so even if they're given the opportunity to express this sadness, this grief, this depression, this inability to understand a situation or to be in new territory, they don't have the tools to do it. They don't, because they've never been allowed to express it. They, and when they have expressed it, they have been shunned, or they've been treated like they're not allowed to have these kind of emotions. And that's just a recipe for disaster. So I wanted to expand on that. I for the most part, knew what you meant, but I wanted to hear your personal story on that.
Yeah, no, it's fine, Mark. Yeah, and the thing is, my father, he was a coal miner. My grandfather, all my uncles, all were coal miners. I worked underground. So it was a case that I'm the first actually generation not to go underground because all the mines are closed now, You okay?
What?
You okay?
Me?
Yeah, you okay? Should I carry on?
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, I said, wow. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Well, I didn't tell you to stop. No, I just said, wow, because you mentioned mining. I thought that was fascinating. That's all.
Yeah, yes. Sorry, Mark. So I'm the first generation not going underground. So, all my grandparents and, all of them miners and uncles. So it was a very manly, tough underground digging away. And come out. So they didn't really talk about their mental health. It was a case of like, but I think one thing that what I did learn about the mining community, they did talk and they did offload side by side where they were digging the coal. But unfortunately, when the pits closed, there was a lot of depression after because they didn't have that way to vent how the frustrations,
Right.
So, and I found with my work in fathers, a lot of fathers sometimes talk better side by side by doing something, whether it's football or walking. So I think it's somebody said it's a bit of research in that says that sometimes men in general do talk better side by side sometimes. So, but going back to you just said, yeah, it was nobody talked about their mental health, and my parents certainly didn't. And even though they got fantastic parents, yeah, there was never a conversation around mental health. And after all, we all got mental health, and we like physical health. Sometimes it can be good, and sometimes, in my case, it was very bad during that time.
Yeah, well, it's good that you had an understanding. I mean, because I think it's the understanding that led to all this stuff. And it's so nice to see a story when someone had that experience and then the experience led them to help other people. And that's why it's so nice to chat with you today to sort of help you to get the message out, to help people to see that, they're not alone. I mean, that if they do run into issues and so forth, there are avenues, and it is understandable, and it's not strange or unusual. It's okay. It's okay if things get tough once in a while. It's okay. It doesn't mean you're not good at being a dad. It just means that you're a human being, and that, everybody needs some sort of avenue, whether it is chatting with someone or listening to something like this, or, physically going out and doing something so that you can kind of stabilize yourself and feel good about you, and even doing something for yourself. And that's the hard part, is when you're trying to commit yourself to taking care of these little people, to say, well, I should really go out and do something for me.
Yeah.
And that's the opposite of how you're feeling at the time, so that's why that was so hard for me. But I really gave that a lot of thought, and I realized, yeah. And then I realized, okay, this is the whole mask discussion. It's the whole reason why on airlines they tell you to put your mask on first, which
Yeah.
sounds
Yeah.
counterintuitive. And the whole point of the mask is that if you don't put your mask on and you're gasping for air, you can't help your kids. So you have to put yours on first before you put theirs on. And that's one of the hardest things to think about, but it makes sense metaphorically and it makes sense in real life. So, everyone needs to put their mask on first before they help their kids.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's it's funny. You're so right when you say that. And I think, well, we can say for both of us, well, the work we're doing now is, I think my son is going to think, well, I won't mind helping other people as well, because I think from a negative time in my life, we've actually turned into a positive now. My wife Michelle, she works in mental health. She's
Well,
yeah, she does a lot of work, for like an advocate. She's done loads of different projects. She's like a youth worker. So we changed your career from actually earning probably better money then than we are now. But I think our passion and our purpose totally changed, totally different direction. And it was from actually setting up Fathers, reaching out. Went on to obviously write a book, and I recently have my second published book with a doctor I work with, and obviously TV, radio stations. I've met the royal family. Loads of things have happened in the last 10 years.
well,
So, a lot of
hey,
good things come out of something bad as well. Like, we changed policies as well in the UK. So we've done some really groundbreaking stuff as well.
that's amazing.
So yeah, I urge people, just say, like, if you've got an idea, go for it. Don't let anyone tell you can't do anything, because International Fathers Mental Health Day was just an idea. All my work has just been ideas. Okay, some things haven't worked. I think I've failed more times than I've succeeded, but it's those failures have actually made me grow stronger and realize that I need to push on. Because the reason why I do push on, because I know deep down how many of these parents are actually struggling in silence. And my son is going to be a father one day, if he wants to be. And, that support will be there for him.
No, that's awesome. And so I want to make it clear that as part of this podcast, people will see the article that comes with it. And the article is nice because the article kind of touches on things that you may have missed that we talked about. And one of those things is I always make sure to have all the links there. So people have a link to you, people have a link to your books, people have a link to the International Father's Mental Health Day site as well, and so forth. So I want to make sure that we have that. And of course, I'll have gathered all that information from you by the time this, we're talking today, and people have already received this in their email. So, but just so that people can hear it, what are the names of your two books?
Yeah, so it's Daddy Blues, and that's a memoir about my time, obviously growing up and obviously going through depression, post-depression, anxiety. It's depression in the first year. Post-depression is obviously looking after my wife, Michelle, after traumatic birth, post-depression. I suffered 5 years later. And the second book, it's an academic book, which coming from a non-academic background, started working with Dr. Jane Handley going back about 9 years ago now. And we got a book out, I think it's the first of its kind. It is the first of its kind, called Fathers and Perinatal Mental Health, which you can find on Amazon. And or the link below, Mark would say. And I think it's working with the academics like Jane, and it's put me in a different world where I lecture in universities. I do loads of different things, but also we've done some journals and published papers as well, which I've never thought in my wildest dreams I would actually be doing things like that. So yeah, and also International Father's Mental Health Day. I've got a hashtag How Are You Dad as well. I started that going back a couple of years ago. So it's a library of information for research, dad stories, anything on paternal mental health or new fathers' mental health.
Wow, that's wonderful. I mean, it's amazing how something that is negative can turn into such a massive positive effort. And I mean, both on your part and your wife's parts. I mean, the difference that you make is, I'm sure, huge. And I mean, and through this even greater, to be able to reach even more people, to spread this kind of awareness of something that some people may have no clue about. I mean, there's some interesting statistics that you shared as well that I bet a lot of people are probably unaware of.
Yeah, well, there's some really good organizations around the world now as well. But also people don't realize that if dad is struggling, well, obviously that's going to impact on mum's mental health as well. So
Right.
A lot of fathers have gone through loads of different factors, loss of children. It could be, something's happened during pregnancy, in the theatre, loads of reasons why the fathers get depressed or they suppress their feelings. So it does have an impact on the family. So a lot of family relationships have actually broken down because of this, silent illness, depression, anxiety. So yeah, it's just raising awareness that, and also, it can have an impact, like I mentioned earlier on that development of the child as well. So, if you go back to the research, believe it or not, you won't believe it, that at least 1 in 10 fathers actually suffer from postnatal depression. And it's always been a myth that it's hormonal. There is a factor in that, but there's not really strong evidence that actually says it's hormonal. It's mostly, what I will say is if you want to add that, is testosterone actually lowers during this time for fathers, or men, I should say. But it's mostly from like past history of anxiety, depression, or traumas before they become parents. It could be financial reasons, unexpected pregnancy. It could be, like I mentioned, a traumatic birth, seeing that, or a loss of a child. There's loads of factors how fathers, like obviously we know mothers for years, actually suffer from postnatal depression. So postnatal depression is depression in the first year of parenthood, I should say. And we're going back to perinatal mental health. That's the antenatal period as well. That's before pregnancy as well, where fathers can actually struggle as well.
Well, I would imagine that, human beings of whatever gender struggle with bringing life into the world. I mean, it's such a monumentous thing, and when it hits you, it's just absurdly important. So I can see how that affects people before, during, and after, and how, we tend to joke about it, we tend to downplay it sometimes, but it really is such a monumental thing. And, arguably, and people can't argue with me on this, it just seems to be the most important thing you could possibly do, is to continue the human race. I mean,
Yeah.
it's such a, and that's on your shoulders. Ta-da!
Yeah, yeah.
Congratulations,
Happy
you have a
go.
baby. So, for both people in one measure or another. And I think that sharing that burden is such an important thing. And,
Absolutely, Mark. No, you're right.
and yeah, and in however it works in your relationship. And, unfortunately, the divorce rate is something like 50%. And so it's unfortunate that that's fragmented in so many families and so forth. Or those, God bless you, the people that are raising a kid on their own. So it's amazing what is on your shoulders. It's such a huge thing. There are so many other things in life that we have recognition for saying, wow, that's a lot of pressure on your shoulders. But people, until they meet other parents, don't realize just what other people go through sometimes. And especially, like you said, about the dads having those same feelings, and I think on the surface, a lot of people would probably guffaw at that and say, nah, come on, how can that be that big of a deal for a dad? I mean, he's not going through the pregnancy, he's not going through a lot of that stuff, but he's still one of the parents. He didn't physically do the amazing miracle that the mom did, but he is still there, and he's still monitoring himself every day and looking in the mirror and saying, am I doing the right thing? Am I being the best that I can? And
Absolutely, Mark.
right.
And you're spot on. And what I will say is that all fathers or parents to be, they struggling with their mental health before they become parents. So, or they're managing it. Like, for instance, with dad with bipolar or schizophrenia, clinical depression, ASD, ADHD. So, they're self-managing, and the baby comes along, lack of sleep, of course it's going to have an impact on your mental health. So the only way, like I describe it, there's loads of reasons why fathers actually struggle during this time. And and also, like you just mentioned, your identity changes as well, from your social aspect, going out and being able to go to the gym and all these positive coping skills you've put in. And all of a sudden the baby comes along, then obviously your lifestyle change is going to change a lot more. And so, so that's why I think the November report, the 1 in 5 British fathers are totally isolated because they're not making those connections after the baby being born. So,
right. And you mentioned ADHD, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you and I had a very interesting exchange recently over something kind of unrelated to this, where I didn't realize just how important formatting was. And so, and that you not to put you on the spot about ADHD, but I'm sure that plays a huge part in something as well. All things being perfect, this is still a burden. This is still something that people have to deal with. It's a monumentous thing. But then considering, like you said, perhaps a pre-existing condition of something like ADHD or something that someone's dealing with. So, that's something I hadn't really considered, I guess. I guess I've been,
You're right,
something I hadn't.
You're right. And like you said, I was never diagnosed with any sort of PND or PTSD. Professionals, professors and doctors have since told me that I would have been if I was screened for my mental health during that time. But what I was diagnosed after having a breakdown 5 years after my son was born was actually ADHD. I've had it all my life. And especially in the UK, it was never picked up as a child in the 80s, 90s, dyslexia. So I've self-managed my ADHD as best I can. So like I said, when you've got that structure in place, and then the baby comes along, lack of sleep, my wife got postnatal depression, financial reasons, costs, there's loads of factors why I was struggling during this time. So ADHD, I was so in denial because I was thinking, hang on, how can I, I thought it was children get ADHD, but as I know now, it's like any other disorder. It doesn't go, but, so it's always there for the rest of my life, as part of me. So, yeah, I've learned a lot, and that's why I'm actually writing my third book now, and it's all the donations or the royalties of the book is going to go to a local charity that helped me during that time as well, because I was so in denial.
That's so nice. That's so, and it's so interesting too, to be able to say that, something can just be done slightly differently and it can help someone who is dealing with dyslexia and ADHD. That's really interesting stuff. So, and again, it's just one of those many hidden silent things that people don't really think about. You don't, you don't pass by someone in a coffee shop and go, oh yeah, that guy's got ADHD.
Yeah.
It's not something that jumps out, just like it's not something that jumps out if someone's hurting inside. And I think of that.
Yeah.
I think of that with road rage, and I've told my kids and other people that, and that when someone is really angry on the road and they cut you off or whatever, you don't know what they're going through. I'm not saying give everyone a free pass for being a jerk. I'm just saying when something happens and someone seems uncharacteristically short or cold or angry about something, it could very well be that person just going through a divorce, or that person just had the most horrible news told to them. So rather than throw gasoline on that, perhaps just kind of back off and go, wow, I'm glad I'm not dealing with that right now. So it's a very different perspective that only occurred to me not too long ago, that if something happens on the road and someone's super angry, I think, well, they're not mad that I'm going faster than them. They're not mad at me. They're mad that I'm just another thing in the way of something
Yeah.
that's bothering them. Right.
That's true. That's true. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And I think, I've had my frustrations or struggling, and people say, oh, dyslexia, that's another part of the, interlinks, and people say it's a label. It's only, in my opinion, a label if you do something with it. So, I know what I'm up against now every day.
Right.
I mean, so
Well,
it's
that's a
not
great.
it's not like a label to me, Mark. I know it's, otherwise it was like an invisible intruder. Yeah, I know what I'm up against. I know why I behave. I know put my positive coping skills in place, like mindfulness and CBT, all these positive coping skills that works for me. So walking, exercise, that sort of thing. So
Yes.
it's only a label if you don't do nothing with it. So that's why I look at it.
Well, and I think you're touching on something that's really important, because label is such an important thing, but we've demonized it so badly that it's made it difficult for us to deal with things. So we're so afraid to put a label on something that we can't get our arms around it. So if you say, hey, I have ADHD and dyslexia, or I have depression, or I have this, or I have that, then you can say, oh, I've defined it. Now I can do something with it. But if you say, oh, don't label it, well, then now you're kind of lost in the mist, and you can't really react to it. So do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like two sides of the same coin, in which you say, well, don't call it that. Well, I have to call it something so I can deal with it. And I
Exactly.
think that's when you really can get some control over it.
You're perfect. That's perfectly well said, because it's whatever it is. You go to doctors and whatever it is. I'm not going to go into some of the illnesses. But you treat it then. You know what it is, and then you treat it. That's the whole point of having a diagnosis. It's just that
Right.
it's when people just get a label and off you go, and and it can be hard for them then. So, and especially in the early days, I was in denial. Because I didn't realize adults can actually get ADHD. I was a father, I had a dad with ADHD. So it's been a bit of a process where I've got the stage of my life where now that my wife, understands it better as well. And,
Mm-hmm.
23 years together, she realizes now when I used to go down the shop and forget things, and my mind's racing, and all these ideas, I'm impulsive, and
Sure.
but like I said, I've learned to manage it a lot better.
Well, that's wonderful. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, as I always promise people, never to take more than an hour of their time. There's very valuable time. So I'm very much appreciating how much you've spent with me and us. But I wanted to ask you a couple things. One was, it being Father's Day, do you have any Father's Day traditions that you do with your son?
Yeah, mostly play football, play sport. I was a football coach for years. On a Sunday, we used to always do something on a Sunday, mostly around football, sport. We both really enjoy. So, and obviously, I always have a Father's Day card, and he does spoil me. So yeah, that's exactly what's happened today. Is it? That's exactly what happened. We had a game of football and a card. So I'm happy with that, and also see my
Well,
father as well. So, which is always
that's
important.
that's wonderful. And then the other thing I always ask people, and again, uh, I will have everything in the article, but is there any other thing you wanted to touch on or shout out to or mention before we sign off and say goodbye?
No, if people want to have a look at my story, I did actually do a TEDx talk going back a couple of months. It's TEDx, The Importance of Fathers' Mental Health. And if you just Google Mark Williams, Fathers' Mental Health, there's loads of different articles and also the hashtag How Are You, Dad? And obviously what we mentioned earlier on, the International Father's Mental Health Day. So there's a lot of stuff in the internet now. So, and the most important thing is why I wrote the book, especially, is that I think I wish I had somebody else who understood it as well. I had all these feelings and I didn't know any other father. So that's why I do the podcast, the articles, because if it touches one father, then
Yes.
that's success, and don't suffer in silence. I always say, the quicker the help, the quicker recovery.
Right. Well, and speaking of touching other fathers out there, so again, happy Father's Day to anyone who fills the role of a dad, whether it's the opposite of what I had, where you're a mom filling the role of a dad, or you're a dad being a dad, and what have you. I mean, happy Father's Day to everyone out there. And Mark has a tremendous amount of resources Mark has a tremendous amount of resources that you can draw from and make connections and go down the rabbit hole, if you will, to see all this other stuff. And you can take a look at Mark's TEDx talk and his books and the links to articles and all that good stuff. So again, happy Father's Day to everyone today from both me and Mark, and happy Father's Day to you too, Mark.
And same to you, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah. And thank you so much for being here and having this chat with us.
No, I really enjoyed it, Mark. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You take care.
Take care now. Bye.
Happy Father's Day. The Sword and the Sunflower is completely free on Kindle this weekend, so go grab yourself a copy and enjoy it. Thanks.